Welcome. Michiel, are you here with us?
Absolutely. Good morning.
Great. Great to see you again.
Yes, fantastic. It's been, what, 3 weeks since we met each other in Brussels?
Yeah. And I'm really happy to have you here with us today because your presentation was really great. So looking forward to see that one again. I'll
Thank you
stop
for inviting
sharing
me.
my screen so you will be able to take over.
Thank you.
So
Let me
welcome
start.
everybody to HackCon Online. With us now, we have Michiel Lemmens, and the stage is yours.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Germund, for that kind introduction. I hope you haven't set the expectations too high for this one. My name is, as you mentioned, Michiel Lemmens. As you may notice, I am speaking English because I am not Norwegian. I saw some Norwegian going on in the chat. Very nice. I have no idea what it means. So if you have any questions, please drop them in English so I will actually be able to help you with your questions there. So my name is Michiel Lemmens, and I will be talking to you today about a red team engagement I did recently with a client of mine in the European construction sector. And I was working with them and found some interesting stuff that I will be sharing with you today. All the sensitive information from the client has been redacted so that you can freely use and share this presentation as you wish. So who am I? My name is Michiel Lemmens, and for over the last 10 years, a little over 10 years, I've been working in cybersecurity with a focus in offensive operations. I've worked in high security environments as well with stringent requirements as to what can be done and not done in the environment. And I'm also an instructor for the Offensive Ops curriculum for SANS Institute, where I teach advanced penetration testing, also the hacker tools techniques course, and probably in the future, the kernel exploitation course, the advanced exploit development course. So I have a strong focus on offensive ops, and there's a very good reason for that, actually, why I love to focus on offensive ops. And that is that probably most of you do a lot of valiant efforts to try to secure your environments. And that is usually to a lot of great results, but not always and not in every organization. And that is the whole reason why I love doing offensive ops, because for me, it closes the feedback loop between what we want to achieve and what we actually achieve. Because an actual attacker will never care about your efforts. They will not care about the time you spend and about the money you spend. I'm willing to assume, I know none of them personally, that they don't care much about you, and they especially won't care about how much time and work you put in. What they care about is if you achieve the results, if it worked. And that is my whole focus in offensive ops, is to verify if what you have tried to secure and what you've tried to do actually worked. Because that is the only thing the attacker in the end will be concerned about, if the efforts you put in led to the results that you wanted to achieve. And that is the whole way and the whole reason I love doing offensive ops. It closes the loop between we want to do something, we plan to do something, we execute things, and then do we achieve the results? That's the whole point. I have a whole different talk on that if you want, on how we can use offensive ops on that, but that will lead us too far away from our subject today. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a red team engagement with a client, which started off in a bit of a peculiar way, a way that usually red team engagements don't start, but this one did, and it ended up with a couple of very nice findings at the end. Okay. So the client is called, in this case, Redacted.org, which is, of course, not their real name. And they're active in manufacturing. They make things for the construction sector. So they make a specific part of the construction chain. They have an annual revenue of 440 million with, and I can put my laser pointer here, 440 million revenue a year for this organization. And they have 2 people working full-time on IT security. Their environment is not very complex. It's relatively easy to see in a schedule, if you will, in an overview or in a schema. I've seen environments, especially high security environments, with hundreds, literally hundreds of network segments being separated logically as VLANs or physically through other means. This one was simpler. They had some OT, but this was mainly an IT environment. And plus, there was also a whole bunch of contractors working there, mainly on security solutions that the client had bought. And then the contractors came in to manage those organizational infrastructure, to manage that part that they delivered, if you will. There was some searches through logs happening that a consultant came in a couple of times a month to have a look at, etc. The main concern was ransomware. They were mainly concerned of their organization getting fully debilitated by a malicious attacker, taking down their IT infrastructure. And there were a couple of parts of their infrastructure which were actually pretty critical to keep that factory running. The OT part was not as extensive that it would take down production, but the IT part definitely was. A whole bunch of scheduling that happened that needed absolutely to have that IT environment to be up in order for it to work. They had quite stringent delivery requirements as to when they would deliver and how they would deliver. All that would become impossible if they didn't have any computers anymore, which was basically their main fear. The talk that I'll be holding here focuses on paths that concern ransomware, but I'm highlighting more the paths that are also applicable to cyber espionage actors with more advanced skills. You may have seen from the title that at some point we're going to meet a vulnerable driver. That's something that's not always exploited by ransomware actors. Some CTI analysts will probably disagree with me on this one. I yield to their expertise in this field without a doubt, but it's more common to see ransomware actors exploit misconfigurations in Active Directory, vulnerable services that are exposed and that have public exploits rather than actually writing one-day exploits. Now, when you start the red team engagements, the goal is to simulate an actual threat actor, and the actual threat actors actually use a couple of different techniques to get in. One of the most common ones is credential abuse, a password that leaks and that is then used by the threat actor to log in again. Exploiting something that's exposed and that's vulnerable, which we'll be seeing coming up very soon in our client Redacted Corp. Phishing, where an employee gets phished and they click on something they shouldn't have, which leads to code execution on a workstation, for example. And then lastly, this is from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report from 2025. It's a fantastic report with a lot of information on breaches that were investigated by Verizon. And in 42% of the cases, it was a different factor or they could not identify it in their investigation. So basically, 22% credential abuse, 20% vulnerability, 16% phishing. If you had a red team engagement in your environment before, probably that red team used the factor at the bottom of the slide, phishing, which is still the most common way to start red team engagements, is that the red team company gives you a payload to run on a workstation and they will see if it runs. Or they might even tell you, workstation compromise is sort of assumed because workstations are very hard to secure. There's a very large diversity of traffic and behavior on that workstation. And combine that with the fact that there are a lot of users on workstations, a lot of different kinds of profiles of users. It's very hard to hammer down the hatches on a workstation compared to, for example, a server where only a couple of people use it and it has specific applications. It doesn't need internet connectivity, etc. Both are legitimate ways to go about. To be quite frank and fair, usually it's also a discussion about money. How much time do you want to spend times the day rate? That's also part of the equation. And I get that part. You don't have unlimited budgets. If you do, then congratulations, but most organizations do not. For this red team engagement, though, we're going to start somewhere else. My client was mainly concerned about them getting ransomware in their environment, and ransomware actors also commonly exploit vulnerabilities on exposed services. And a couple of months before I actually got a meeting with the client to schedule the red team engagement, they had a bit of a scare with a vulnerability that was exposed to the world, and they were actually quickly patching it because there was active exploitation of that vulnerability. There was already been scanning on that vulnerability. And so they had a bit of a scare there. They had a close call and they wanted me to look at the external parameter as well and try to start from there. Now, I prefer not necessarily to do that by scanning things, because at that point, you're just looking at a snapshot of the environment at the moment that I do the scan. And if I don't discover something, or if I see a service, but it only gets a vulnerability in 6 months because it's not known yet, well, that's not really realistic. You can then start deploying payloads in the external perimeter, which I love to do. I can drop a Docker in there that's mine, and then we simulate that exploitation. But it also takes quite some time to do that scanning, and it's not necessarily very thorough. But I agree with the client, like this was an engagement of 10 days. Let's take 1 day to do that perimeter check. And if we have any visibility on problems inside the perimeter within the first day, then we can decide to continue that path, or otherwise on day 2 in the morning, we'll sit together and see if we might want to switch to doing a phishing scenario, which is relatively quickly to set up for me. So we took a day to look at the perimeter, and that's where our story today starts, scanning the client's perimeter based on the IPs and the domains they gave me, scanning that perimeter and seeing what's there. Okay. Now, the agenda of this talk today and of this walkthrough, I'm not going to give it to you at this point in time, because there's something very particular about red team engagements, and I'm guessing also malicious attackers have that same problem, is that when you land inside an environment, at that point in time, you actually don't really know exactly where you landed. It's not known to you. And so you have to figure that out along the way. There's a lot of unknowns that you meet, and you have to find your way through the environment and see, where does this lead? When I used to do a different kind of job, I had a coworker who once said, you have at most 70% of the information, and you can count on 20 percentage points of that being wrong. So you have to work with that. I'm giving you a bit of that experience here. If you're not used to doing offensive ops, well, this is how it usually goes. You see only a very small part of the environment, which at this point in time is nothing yet. And we'll see when we scan the perimeter how we expose more of the map, if you will, of the world we're in. Now, I was scanning the perimeter, and I came across an application. I'll put it in full screen mode. It's an HTTP application. It's just a website. You see it's a URL. It's currently running on my system, so it's not, this is a mock-up of the system. You will not be able to find client information in there. Don't worry, I'm not exposing sensitive things. Discretion is the most important value of all, probably for an offensive operator. And I come across this application, which shows me a CPU and RAM usage. Okay. And if I go down a bit, I see the processes running and memory use of these processes. Okay, that's a bit strange to see that exposed to the world. It was exposed on a weird port, 18010, which is not a common port to be used, but I always scan all ports. So I found this one. Bit weird that we see this information. And there's not a lot going on here. The actual application in the client environment was a bit more complex, but none of the pages actually led anywhere. So, we'll look around a bit, and we have a button here that says download logs. And if I click that, it downloads a file, logs.zip, which if I open it, contains a .log file with some JSON in it. I can probably zoom that in a bit. Some JSON in it, which if you go through that, you might recognize things from the page. It's actually just the information from the page, basically. It's logging whatever it's doing there. It's downloading that. Okay, so this doesn't really give me much information. There's nothing sensitive in here. If you go through that, there's not much in there. That's that. Okay, so that was my starting point. I was thinking, I click a button, which downloads the logs. I click a button, and it downloads the logs. How does that do that on the back end? Because logs are not by default stored in zip format, they're text format. They might be zipped by a cron job that does the archiving, but how does it work under the hood? Well, I hooked it up to a proxy, Burp Suite, and I see this. A post request to download -logs, and it says content type JSON, and it contains a JSON object, which contains log_path, /log/star. Now, this is interesting to me. The path that's provided here probably is used in that zipping at some point, and user end apparently sends it. To give you a bit of to jump ahead a bit for you, when I spoke to the client and they spoke to the vendor, it was something that was hacked together by a vendor quickly and just dropped there and forgotten. So basically, it was not the most well-written thing in the world. I asked them if it was vibe coded with LLMs. They didn't give me a response. Log/star. That's interesting. Now, can I modify that? Can I impact that in any way? Well, if we have a look on what happens server side, I got the code afterwards, after I got code execution out of this and got out of my container. There I got the source code, and I got that zip command being constructed here, which does zip into a file name, and then that log path provided by the user, or in this case, attacker, the log path. Then some sanitization goes on of sorts. And then it's a Python-based server, I think it was Flask underneath it, os.system with that command that was constructed on top here. Now, that's probably interesting for me, because if we're starting to construct that command here from my parameter, I control it. Why not try using etc shadow here, etc/star, meaning we can fetch all files from etc and get etc shadow, which contains the hashes on the Linux system, and then I have password hashes, which I can try to crack, and then perhaps there's SSH open, I can log it. I don't know, let's try. And it fails. It doesn't work. Probably that sanitizes in the way, and it's trying to do away with stuff like I'm doing here. It's cleaning up that user input, that etc stuff. Okay, but it's filtering it. It's sanitizing it. How is it doing that sanitization? Because there's /log says start. Perhaps it just has to start with /log. Let me try /log/./, which is directory traversal, and then etc. Because the final result of this is going to be /etc/star. It's just that perhaps the sanitization likes it. It didn't. It still failed. Okay. Tried a couple of more things, because this is pretty quick payloads to test. I tried dozens of ways of getting past it, URL encoding it, etc. Didn't help. Okay, now we're stuck a bit. Let's have a think here. How can we do more about this? Remember how that command was constructed to zip? What happens if I append after that /log says star ampersand ping -31111 to ping to 1111, which is just a placeholder command here? Well, what then happens on that Python os.system zip to a file /log/star. This is my input here, starting at my laser pointer here, /log/star, and which continues execution is the second command you put in the command line. I'm pinging somewhere. Isn't that grand? Command injection, and it did work. I pinged one of my servers, not 1111. I pinged a server that was under my control. I got a ping back. That's fantastic. Now we're very close to getting a reverse shell. Because all I have to do now is add an ampersand, and I have 45 minutes for this talk. Allow me to make a couple of simplifications, except from me that this red part is a reverse shell. If you're not familiar with it, it basically sends a shell back to my system so I can issue commands remotely on that server. That's what this bash redirection does. For those who are more versed in offensive ops, I will add here that I'm using this as a demo here. In the actual engagement, I have to make sure I don't do harm to my client environment. So I will use an encrypted reverse shell payload, which means I drop my payload and run it, which is what I did in this case. But this is easier to demonstrate here in this talk. So this is unencrypted. In actual engagement, of course, I'm using encrypted payloads. In this case, this is a reverse shell back to my payload and to my system, and it will come back to port 4444 and give me command execution on that server. If we take that command here, that post request, which is just to describe post request, and we throw it in curl, which is the URL browser, online browser on command line for Linux, then we get a curl request that looks like this. It's the exact same thing. It's just put in curl. That's it. Okay, let's see that happening. Where's my Ubuntu? I'm gonna start a command prompt here. My Ubuntu is pretty slow today. It must have the Thursday morning syndrome. I'm gonna take 2 command prompts. On the first one, I'm gonna start my listener. Oops, that's a keyboard hanging. -LVNP, listener on port 4444. This is on my attacker machine. Then I will copy over. I have it noted down here somewhere so I can easily copy it. This is that exact same curl command that we just saw, where we're going to curl against that server, the download logs, and here is our reverse shell on my command line in the non-marked part, the red part here, this part. That's all command shell. There we go. And on my listener, I get a shell back. Woohoo! I'm inside the environment. I'm inside that that vulnerable app. I'm on that server, and I can issue commands here. I can say, who am I? I am root. The fact that it prints out my command is, for those who are unfamiliar, it's common for a non-interactive shell. Let's have a look around. But I'm a bit concerned already because I don't like seeing things called container. Container, I don't like that. Where are we here? Let's see, ls/home. There's nothing in /home. That's suspicious for a Linux server to have nothing in /home. Let's look at the, and I'll make it full screen. Let's look at what's in the / folder. Damn, I'm in a Docker. I'm in a Docker container. I'd rather just be on a server, but now I'm inside a Docker. That is a problem. We'll have to deal with that. I'm root inside the Docker. I'm inside the container, but we have to deal with it. Now, to give you back the schedule, we're having our Statmon web app. It's what the page was called, Statmon web app, but it's running inside a Docker. That's an issue. That's a big issue because Dockers and containers in general are inherently secure, right? They're always secure. I don't know. I don't know. Because let's go back to our Docker here for a second. Let's go back to our web app. We get CPU monitoring and we get RAM monitoring and we get a whole bunch of information here down that contains information that's definitely not all running inside that Docker. There's some way in which this container is monitoring the processes on the server, not on the Docker alone. Unfortunately, this was set up in a pretty wide way in this case, giving access to a lot. Because if I do a ps-aux here, I get a printout of all the processes running on that host, not just inside the Docker, but I can see all processes on the host, all the way up to the init process. Now, because of the permissions here, what we can do is basically we can enter, because one of the ways in Docker that Docker separates these processes from a container from those on the host is using namespaces. So I can, let me make this a bit bigger, do a command called nsenter to enter in that namespace of process 1, the init process, take over the mounts, take over the UTS, meaning you start sharing processes and files and network and process IDs. I can basically say enter into the namespace of the host, which is effectively getting out of that container and onto the host. Mount UTS IPSnet --PID. Whoops. See, that's non-interactive shell is not the same as an interactive shell. We just hit enter here, unrecognized, and as enter --target1 --mount --UTS --IPC for inter-process communication, net process IDs. There we go. And now we have a shell as root. But if we ask the OS on what host we are no longer inside the container. We are on the outer system, the host system. By the way, if this non-interactive shell with no prompting bothers you, I can give you an interactive one with a prompt, which basically just gives us that prompt. But I have exact the same rights outside of it. It's just a static difference. That's it. I can show you that. We're still in the outside the Docker onto the host. If I do ls on the slash folder, we see we don't have Docker env anymore, and we are definitely outside our host system, our guest system on the host, and we can cat etc shadow, have access to the files. We have full access to this system right now. Okay. We are outside our Docker. Now, comes the difficult part, is that this client is on a Windows environment. If I would not have known that beforehand, I would have supposed it. 95% of client devices are Windows in environments, corporate environments. Somewhere on Mac OS, I've seen almost nobody on Linux as user workstations. And as a matter of fact, this is their main concern, is their Windows environment. So we're still not in a Windows environment. I'm on my Linux still. But doing some post-exploitation here, foraging around the home folders here. And if I would go into user at this point, cat bash history, grep -i smb client. This took me a bit of time to get to that point, to get through all that history, of course, of all those users. But there's one of the admins that uses SMB clients regularly. And SMB client is a Windows software, as a Linux software to connect to Windows file shares over SMB, connecting to a server, a share name on that server with domain name redacted, username domain user, percentage, and then a password on the command line, because admins still regularly use passwords on command line. So basically what I have now, I'm on a Linux inside the DMZ, because this was supposed to be the DMZ. We're in the DMZ on a Linux host. I have a name for a system inside the redacted domain. I have a username, and I have a password. I have credentials. I can try seeing what these credentials do. And if I can use these credentials successfully, I'll have a foothold inside the Windows domain of the client. Okay? Now, this is what we currently know. We have our Docker host and our Statmon app. We already discussed that. We have that DMZ boundary, and I'll discuss the question mark in a second. And we have credentials for a Windows server, where we know that a share is open, and the user that we have, a domain user we have, has rights there, and we have the credentials for it. And that Windows server is part of the domain of Redacted Corp. Okay. Now, I have a question mark here with this DMZ. I spoke to the client at the debriefing. This presentation here is a snippet of like 30, 40 minutes out of a debriefing that took well over 3 hours, if you calculate all the time that we spent together discussing the findings. So there's some simplification here. But the DMZ is named DMZ in the client environment until we had a debrief call, because from that DMZ, I could talk to the Windows environment over SMB, WMI, HTTPS, and a bunch of other irrelevant protocols. Now, if you give me SMB, which I know we have that access because that SMB client was being used, that means I can drop on a share, on a folder on that Windows server, I can drop a payload. And WMI means I can execute that payload. In what way can you then call it a DMZ if a DMZ is supposed to be the area of your network that you keep separate from your internal network, which if it gets compromised because it's so exposed to the internet, if it gets compromised, it's not the biggest of problems for you internally in your production. So it was basically a separate network segment, not a DMZ. We'll see how to fix this at the end of the presentation. Don't worry about that. The mitigations are also discussed. But basically, the DMZ was not really a DMZ. Okay, so SMB to drop a payload, WMI to execute the payload, and I have a C2 payload that talks back to my command and control framework. And I have a payload inside the environment, foothold there, and we are here. As a regular user, no privileges regarding administration, etc., normal user. Now, I'm looking at that server, and there's a domain admin logged into that server. Yes, indeed, Arash, somebody misunderstood DMZ. Absolutely. They definitely did. That's one of the biggest problems that led to this jump here. This is not how to set a DMZ, that's for sure. We have a domain admin logged in. In the actual engagement, there was a user logged in that was local admin to a different server, and there was a domain admin logged in. But I merged the two to make it quicker in the talk. Again, 3 hours into 30 minutes. I'm simplifying a bit, but the principle is the same. Domain admin logged in into that Windows server and can talk to the domain controller, of course. That's what domain admins can do. And so I am a regular user on that Windows server. I urgently need to escalate my privileges because domain admin session will be mine. Once you're admin on a system, you can take over a current user session on a Windows, and then you can execute commands as that user. So I have to escalate. So I start my standard checks, weak service binaries, weak service permissions, looking for services that are not patched, any default credentials that I along the way found in the help desk shares, not really finding something that works. Microsoft patches, perhaps there's a Microsoft exploit available. Nope, all of that is dud. None of that works. However, our server 1 that we're currently on has a driver that's not patched. Now, in a nutshell, I'm taking 6 hours of course material into 90 seconds here, in a nutshell. Say that you buy one of those fancy RGB keyboards that allow you to turn on the Knight Rider light on your keyboard, or you can, I don't know, make a walking, whatever. That talks to your computer in a way. And you get a userland application that lives here that allows you to change that light. Now, how does that work? Because your hardware talks to the kernel. Again, this is a simplified image. There's more going on in the actual one, but I have 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Your keyboard talks to the kernel through hardware abstraction layer. That talks to the driver. How do we then change that keyboard into Knight Rider mode? Well, one of the ways it can go, and how it usually goes, is that you start from a Windows API call in kernel 32 called device IO control, which allows you to send commands to a driver, which then can execute them on the keyboard as they are implemented by the driver manufacturer, the one who made the driver, which then turns your light into Knight Rider or whatever it is you want to do with that keyboard. Normal, well-behaved, not exploiting yet. Where the exploitation comes in is that driver suppliers also write vulnerabilities into their code. What if there's an arbitrary mem copy here that allows me to control the destination, the source, and the amount of bytes copied? Then I'm basically corrupting whatever I want inside kernel land, because that's one privilege layer. There's not 7 privilege layers in kernel land. There's one privilege layer at that point. So I can corrupt Windows kernel structures. For example, eProcess structures, which maintain tokens, which maintains the privileges that that process has. Basically, you can, inside kernel land, change that control structure and say, for an arbitrary process, make it the most privileged process on the system. If you can just have a driver with a vulnerability. Unfortunately, due to that model where it's one privilege level, that's it. Okay, let's see that happening. So we're going to move on our Windows system. I spared you the lateral movement because that's not the most exotic thing to see. And this is the Windows server. I'm here as a regular user, which I can show you by saying run as admin, and you see it pops for credentials. So I don't have admin privileges. Otherwise, it would not pop for credentials. It would just be a yes, no prompt. Command prompts. Echo log on server. I'm logged on to DC. I'm part of a domain, and I'm logged into DC. I'm going to try to dir the C drive, which is only admins can dir a C drive on a Windows system, or equivalent privileges. You can give them the privileges individually, but you see this user does not have them. They cannot dir the C drive. Domain admins will. Desktop, exploit. Now, I found this vulnerability, and I basically found it by enumerating the services and also enumerating the drivers. I see this driver, I look up the driver version, and I see there's a CVE for it. What I prefer doing at that point is, okay, I know there's a CVE for it. I have a vague description, as in you could arbitrarily copy memory and address, something like that. Okay, let me try to find it. I can try looking for write-ups, but that's not as fun for me as it is to try to write it myself. So what I do is I look, I open the driver in a disassembler, start looking for the vulnerability, and write the exploit myself. For this one, turns out there's actually a public exploit for it as well, but this is more fun for me. It's a couple of hours that I can really enjoy myself. So that's, I prefer to do that. So I wrote this one myself. I run my exploit, which is basically going to abuse an arbitrary memcopy inside a driver to allow me to steal the token of the system user, system process, which is process number 4 on your Windows, steal that token, and then make my process as privileged as the most privileged one on the Windows. In the actual engagement, I used the same technique, but a different action on target to make it less obvious. This is good for a POC demo here. It's not good for operational use necessarily to do this. This might be a bit too standard, so I used a bit of a different technique in the actual engagement. Run my exploits, and a PowerShell pops, and that PowerShell pops is not the main feature here. The main feature here is that the PowerShell is running as anti-authority system, which is the highest privilege you can obtain on your Windows system. For those who are interested, we use the arbitrary memcopy to find the e-process of the system process, stealing its token, which we find at this address. We are trying to find our current address token, current processes token, and save it somewhere. And then we are overriding it with our systems token, and then we launch PowerShell as that system user. These techniques are related to the fact that we have to take track of accounts, but ignore that if this is new to you. We have our system process here. I'm going to run Mimikatz. Again, I have it on disk here for demo purposes. I would never in my life in a red team engagement use this from disk, only if I want to trigger the SOC, which is sometimes what a client asks. But in this case, it's just for the demo purposes. We're going to dump out the hashes of the logged on users, securely say log on passwords, which we can do as system user. I'll scroll all the way up. We dump out the hashes, and let's see if we can find the one for our domain admin logged in. Scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. Where are you? The order always changes, which is also fun for me because it might not be there. DA Jonathan, domain admin Jonathan, and we have their password hash. Now it is relatively trivial to copy that hash. Securely hash the hash. User DA Jonathan. Domain redacted.corp. NTLM. It's not an NTLM hash, but it's an NT hash, but I happily don't complain about that. Benjamin Delphi is a fantastic security researcher, and I bow to his genius making this tool. Run cmd.exe, which will basically create a logon session for that user using that hash. This is pass the hash technique. Starting a command prompt, which can dir the DC's C drive. Game over. This is now officially my domain. Okay. So that's basically the kernel exploit at that point. The driver that's running there vulnerable to a arbitrary memcopy, and that leads to domain admin token, hash stealing, and then hash to hash, game over. Now, I have a couple of more minutes left to discuss a couple of things. I will happily also open the floor for questions, of course. There was a game over for the client, but then, as I said, this is a technique kernel exploit writing is not necessarily something that ransomware actors are always capable of doing. Some of them might well be able to do it. Then the extra stealth that I add in the engagement, where I do something else in the token stealing, and also the shellcode execution is something different still. Usually that's not what they do. Thanks a lot, Hadi, for the compliments. Much appreciated. A couple of paths that were interesting to the client as well, perhaps more than the kernel exploitation, because they are related to the ransomware actors, and actually also the ones that I exploited first before I started having my part of the fun, if you will. Path number one, start off with credentials on disk that found somewhere on a share some credentials. This account could modify actually Active Directory certificate services templates. Basically, you can make them vulnerable. By making them vulnerable, I can make sure I can request a certificate in the name of the domain administrator, and it's game over. That was path number one. Path number two, there was a share on a help desk share that had a PowerShell script that I could write to. And so basically, I could modify the script, or more importantly, append to it. And that script get run 1 to 2 times, depending on the part of the year. If the quarter was ending, it was run more commonly by a local administrator on the configuration manager, Windows Configuration Manager, SCCM. And so basically, I got code execution there, and domain admins regularly logged into that system. So I got token stealing, and it was also game over. Now, what can we learn from all this? First of all, if you don't need something exposed to the internet, please disable it. Like that Statmon app we saw, please disable that. That if you don't need it, kill it. Web app firewall would probably have blocked me here. They're not omnipotent. They will not block everything, but it would have made my life a lot more harder. I don't necessarily like doing web app pen testing. I prefer doing binary exploitation. A more avid lover of web app pen testing will probably get more around it, but you make it a lot harder. The most important one for this client, perhaps, and in general, do not trust containers out of the box. Everything you open on a container allows a lot more privileges. I showed a couple of things here. Capabilities is something to really, really distrust on containers. Make sure you scrutinize them and you test them. If you have a DMZ and you need it, please isolate it. For this client, I also advised moving a bunch of services to offline hosting, well, offline out of their environment hosting. Move this into the cloud somewhere that's not your environment. If that gets hacked, you don't care. Their website was just a poster, basically, commercial for the company. Don't host that internally. Put that on AWS, put that on Wix, put that on WordPress. So if that gets hacked, it's not you. If you wanted to solve that DMZ problem, make sure DMZ only has inbound traffic. The fact that there are domain credentials on the DMZ system is deadly to your security. Make sure your production systems connect into your DMZ to fetch data, not the other way around, if possible. The driver here was basically part of a software package the client had bought and then didn't use anymore, and they stopped the license, but they forgot to pull the driver out of the gold image. Check those when you're updating systems, and prefer to use just-in-time privileged access and not domain admins logging all over the place and leaving behind hashes wherever they go. More generally, it's not easy securing a complex environment. It's hard. It's really hard. And you probably work in a complex environment. Most environments are complex. It's hard, and that's normal. Small things can be big to an attacker, and you will only know if you have an attacker check it. Of course, you have to assume they're already in. And especially don't trust easy solutions. In the 2 weeks I was working for this client, there were 3 vendors that came by with the new buzzword solution that's going to fix everything. I heard zero trust in that week. I heard AI twice in that week. There was one vendor who used 2 buzzwords. And I heard multi-factor authentication, which is a good idea, but the way they were selling it was buzzword. They don't fix your problems. Who here remembers blockchain? Who here remembers big data was before blockchain? Who here remembers zero trust was also a buzzword, which in the end, there are good ideas in there, but it doesn't fix all your problems. So don't trust that. And of course, invite the benign attackers. Doesn't have to be me. You probably have a good offensive ops partner somewhere. Invite benign attackers before the malicious ones get in, because if you don't, you will never know if what you're doing actually works. That is the end of my presentation. I will happily take questions now from the audience, and then I will happily stay in touch with you as well. I think the chat was active as well. Which small detection gaps do you see repeatedly exploited across different clients or industry? Detection gaps. I see, if you're looking for more advanced detections, I think they're advanced in the sense that I don't see them quite often in smaller organizations. There's a lot of tools you can run to enumerate Active Directory. There's Bloodhound, Sharphound that you can use to enumerate that information. There's also Active Directory Explorer, AD Explorer, that does the same thing. I see clients with high security needs as well detecting that on workstations. Well, the place to detect that is on the server, on the domain controller, based on the amount of traffic and the amount of time. That's one that I see everywhere. Like, as soon as I start running tools through port proxying on that workstation that I land on, rather than running them in the memory of the workstation, then all of a sudden they don't see me do my reconnaissance. That I see always. So detect that on network level, if you will, on the domain controller. Also, requesting certificates is often not monitored. If you have Microsoft Defender for Identity or comparable, it'll automatically monitor it, but it's usually pretty easily bypassed by just waiting for 24 hours before you use the certificate. That's also one I definitely see quite often. Would you find this exposed web server if you ran a broader scan on the internet, or would this generally be a targeted attack? If we were before the engagement, so before the client actually closed this, and anybody could find it on the internet by just scanning all ports, basically. I also found it based on the scan on IPs. So just an nmap-p-, which scans all ports, exposes this and shows this. Yes, so you would definitely find this. And ransomware actors often, in my view, are opportunistic, and so they'll hit whomever they can hit, and then they'll see who the actual target is when they see who they exploited. They might also try to target you, and then they might also find it, because netblock scanning is also a thing on IPv4, not so much on IPv6. But that's just security through obscurity. So both are definitely a way in which this could get detected. Oh, by the way, for detection gaps, I've seen organizations that have, like, I had the feeling they saw every step I took in their environments. When we did the debriefing from the red team, there were still things they didn't see. So I think we have to accept in the detection side of things that we will never reach 100%. We will not even reach 90%. Like 80%, I think, if I'm just putting numbers out there, is probably already a lot, which is probably enough as well, because I need multiple steps to get somewhere.
Seems like people are happy about your presentation and your answers. So thank you for this excellent presentation.
Thank you for inviting me, Germund. It was a pleasure to be here today.
That concludes this session. Thank you for this great work and presenting it to us. We will now have a short break before we start up again at 1100. I'll see you then.